So he's saying that contractions is like cooking. You are cooking up the broth and all the ingredients that are going to be so nourishing that will bring wisdom and clarity and a level of awareness and consciousness and appreciation for what's actually going on. And so he says this helps us understand what unconditional abundance is. Unconditional abundance includes the contraction, but it's never scarcity. Hello everyone, welcome to Elemental Weather, your seasonal elemental check-in. I'm Dany Lyne. I'm an intuitive, and for the last 20 years, I've been co-creating well-being and aligned manifestation with folks worldwide, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. In this series, I'm going to tap us into the primary elemental teacher and their very specific curriculum this season and this year. The more we're aware, the more we're able to integrate that elemental wisdom and its transformational potential into our lives. Subscribe to my YouTube channel to get your seasonal elemental check-in. Good morning and good evening, and to all of you joining us live, hello, big hug. It's so great to see your faces, and welcome to all of you that who will join us via the recording. As you know, it's a momentous change of season. It's with a full moon in the mix and a partial eclipse and solar flares and I don't know what else. So lots of celestial beings rather excited and joining energy. So it's very spicy, as I'm sure you have felt. And it's an interesting time to be that spicy and, in a sense, quite yang in the energy, because we're actually shifting and moving toward the metal element, which is the element of the fall season starting on September 21st, right, and guiding us all the way through to December 21st. You've heard me say that the fire element is the most contaminated and distorted on our planet right now, right? War being a fire, excessive fire expression, those forest fires we've been having, right? Fossil fuels, anger, rage, hatred, right? All of those energies, right, are excess fire. And that's one thing. But the most misunderstood and feared element is the metal element. Because the metal element is really the element that speaks to contraction. We're not super enthusiastic about contraction, right? If you think, right, the trees are coming in, the sap is moving down, we're dropping the leaves, and we're moving into that skeletal, essential aspect of the self. And we're moving inward towards the yin. But it's really intriguing to me that we're being encouraged to move toward the yin in a very yang way. So to me, that speaks of really looking at this time of saying, okay, the most misunderstood element and the most feared one is the one you're going to embrace and learn to embrace and learn what contraction is actually about, as opposed to just thinking, oh my God, I'm aging, I'm not looking so good, right? That's all part of the contraction of the body moving toward death, the reality of that, and all of it. So it's really in the traditional Chinese medicine, we're looking at how does nature work that inherently embedded in nature's generative cycle. Contraction is part of that. So contraction is essential to how life functions and how you could say the water wheel keeps turning, right? How the life force keeps going. So when I was first learning about it, you can imagine my brain just went, wait a minute, this is fascinating, because it's like, okay, how do I come to a place where I can relax with contraction And where it gets even more trippy, guys, is that here we are, right, moving into that contraction, and yet it's harvest time. It's when we're collecting all this bounty from our gardens, all this bounty from our production cycle that we just went through, the manifesting of last year. We're actually collecting the goods, the phenomenal harvest based on effort. Now, the teaching there is so interesting because here we have essentially abundance and tangible abundance in this element as well. And yet where we mess up and where it goes a bit wonky in our culture is that then we tend to amass and keep for ourselves. We're not great at distributing our harvest. We think, right, we're justified to keep it all for ourselves or our family or our children or our bloodline or our culture, or right? There's a kind of me, myself, and I that comes in, and then there's a sense of self-righteousness that can come into that picture. And then we go into where it goes out of balance, where we go into greed, right? That's part of this element. So you can imagine this is hitting us right at a really fundamental anchor in our lives, because this is where we're going to be shown how we manage money, what we think money actually is, right? What we think, all the forms of abundance, and how we manage that, and then how we really haven't learned how to distribute that abundance with elegance and with generosity and with grace. And now I understand why it's Sri Yukteswar who's coming in today. And we haven't had Sri Yukteswar channel for us in quite a while, but now I get it, why it's him, because he's the one who was talking to us about unconditional abundance. The first thing that he's showing me is my morning with the internet, and he said the one thing you had to do was trust that it would all work out. So he said you were living a whole perfectly beautiful moment where we're reminded that the mother of the metal element is the earth element, and the primary highest vibration of the earth element is trust. So he's saying this is really hitting us at a place where when we talk about money, when we talk about our harvest, usually we are stimulated and taken off kilter by fear. Lots and lots of fear. The fear is coming from our lack of understanding and ability to predict how the life force will address the issue, whatever issue you're having. Links in with scarcity, with lack, with things are not working, things are collapsing, or whatever it is. So the fear is coming from lack of knowing how it's going to be resolved. Trust is really when you embrace the fact that it's okay not to know how it will be resolved, but to trust that there is some way in which things will flow. And he's saying that in our ego construction of our mind and our limited wisdom, we cannot begin to imagine the millions and millions of options and resources that the life force has to bring in that energy so that the knots in the system untangle, and even untangle in the space of an hour and a half or whatever it is for the situation that you're in. And so he's also saying that it may not resolve in the way that you want it to resolve, or that your ego wants it to resolve as well. And this is where we get to the element of contraction. Because he's saying your solution that you're imagining will always align in one way or another with expansion. So you think the solution to the problem will always be an expansive expression of the life force rather than a contraction. And yet, in the flow of where you're at and the logic that's going on at soul evolution level, you might be perfectly situated to meet a contraction, and sometimes a massive contraction. And he says that's when people think that the universe is against them, right? Or God has abandoned them, or whatever. Contraction is often where we get pretty suspicious and angry and even perhaps resentful to the energies, and even feel abandoned, right, by those energies. So he's saying the contractions is like cooking. You are cooking up the broth and all the ingredients that are going to be so nourishing that will bring wisdom and clarity and a level of awareness and consciousness and appreciation for what's actually going on. And so he says this helps us understand what unconditional abundance is. Unconditional abundance includes the contraction, but it's never scarcity. So he's saying in modernity, in that matrix, right, money has become the measure for abundance. And he's saying that it's a really limited spreadsheet, because you're just looking at one column in the spreadsheet, and based on that one column, you're having a big moment when you're deciding whether there's abundance or scarcity. And so what we've lost, he's saying, especially in the urbanization of the world, we've lost that connection to the many, many columns in the spreadsheet that actually are being tabulated at a soul level, at a spiritual level. And so he's saying that our distance from nature and from being observant of nature and leaning into nature and being integrated into nature, that we've lost that wisdom. Ultimately, when we're connected to nature and we keep observing nature, and we lean into its flow and knowing that we're integrated into its flow, you could say we know that in the end, life wins in one way or another, even if it includes massive transformation. And there it gets a bit complicated, because in a sense we can say that he's reminding us that ultimately even death as a contraction isn't final, that the soul continues in another form. And so he's saying even death is a contraction that regenerates life. So he's saying where we get confused with that is when we're dealing with war. It's actual human beings who are disoriented and creating violence. And so if violence brings on death, you can't blame death for being the enemy. So we're looking at, basically he's saying, if we're looking at death tolls in situations of violence, we're looking at the result, right, of that many people who are disoriented. And the tragedy of disorientation is this kind of loss. But it's not nature itself creating that loss. That it's people's confusion. And confusion, he says, is very scary. It can be very, very scary. So when you're coming back to trust, he's saying, what you're ultimately trusting in and connecting to in that trust is the fundamental principle of life itself, of the life force, which inherently is regenerative. That's what you're trusting. You're trusting that the elements, right, the building blocks of life itself actually know harmony, live harmony, express harmony. And that it's disoriented humans that get in the middle of all that and can muddle things. But not nature itself. It's not the teacher abandoning you. Right? It's how do you abandon yourself? How confused are you? How disoriented are you? And how confused or disoriented are some of the people on the planet? So that we can land, right, beyond the chaos and beyond the disharmony, and know that underneath all that is a fundamental harmony that will never, ever, it's unshakable. Because that harmony, when the five elements are in harmony, you're touching the eternal. You're touching what is eternal, and you're touching also, you could say, I mean, when you're in ego, you think you're separate from it, but you're touching ultimately that big thing that's out there supporting you, but you're touching that part of you that is that thing that is supporting you, right? The guru within, that part of you, inside of you, deep, deep, deep in the heart of hearts, who is connected to this harmony, is that harmony itself, is that energy itself. So he's saying that when we're facing a contraction, we have a habit of thinking and asking ourselves, what's dying? Right? What is reducing and what is dying? And, and then it's a bit tragic how we define it. And he says, really, when you look at a contraction, the question is, what is birthing? Because we're learning that the contraction, and we're moving toward the water element, is fundamentally the womb. The fall is the time of transition between the external and moving deeper down into, so that we can settle into the womb for the winter season, and so that we can come back at the manifestation level in the spring with the wood element. So if we know we're moving toward the womb, then we know we're moving toward a pregnancy of sorts and a birthing at some point, which might not be on your day timer perfectly scheduled, and might take longer than you think, and all of that. But if you've ever been pregnant, boy, can it be long, right, sometimes. Whereas if we lean into what's birthing, I think we all agree that it's pretty magical that we right, just get pregnant and that babies grow in the womb and then they come out, oh my God, in one way or another. And the magic of that. And who can explain it, really? And then how that little being becomes a soul and is a consciousness. When the soul comes in from infinity, it is contracting into a skin suit, a very specific skin suit in the womb. And yet what will emerge out of that is the expansiveness of what that life journey is, which will then go through the process of contracting again, right, through the death process, to expand again in the infinite space, and again come back through another skin suit, through a contraction, and on and on. Understand that the contraction is a pregnancy. You're moving toward pregnancy. So we're also basically trusting the how the life force functions. And this moving toward the pregnancy in the contraction of fall, moving into the womb of the winter and the water when we're literally pregnant, into the birthing that happens in the spring. For some reason, that takes time, and there's a logic as to how that happens in this earth plane. And what we could call delay in our ego brain is that we need to lean in and observe how these things work and see how the life force is operating, and be curious and trust what is happening. And then what you're doing is you're making sure that you're staying connected to the energy of the life force through your practices, through the meditation, the Qigong, the Tai Chi, all the stuff, the yoga, the walks in the woods, the crystals, the long salt baths, all of it, the stuff that we do to remember. And to remember who we are. And to remember who we are fully integrated in the fabric of life itself. Which ultimately is living you. Contractions and all. Aging and all. Illness and all. Loss of jobs and all. All that stuff. It's still life. Even in death, it's still life. The life force is still living. It's living through that cycle. Contractions are not, essentially a loss of abundance, and they're definitely not scarcity. It's unconditional abundance expressing through its many different cycles. So he's saying sometimes contraction will express itself as the frying pan over the head moment, meaning, right, there's something you're trying to figure out and you're not figuring it out. So, at first it's a gentle tap on the shoulder, then it's a nudge. Eventually, right, you get the frying pan over the head to gain that clarity. The contraction has to get stronger and stronger so that it gets your attention and that you embrace the possibility of change, of growth, of healing, of expansion at your soul level in terms of wisdom and understanding, so that you can shift how you engage in the world. The thing about all this is that we do have blind spots, right? So we are, and the blind spots are all levels of confusion, right, and disorientation that we might have been carrying on, and what some people call karma as well, right? All those levels of densities. Some of these levels of confusion are pretty, are tight, and to unwind those knots can take quite a bit of of explosive energy to get past this blind spot. He says this is exactly what's happening right now, is that we are being given an opportunity to untie some of these pesky knots that we've been tripping over for a long time. Yeah, we don't want to just untangle the knots, right? We're not talking about, the smooth operation of the production of your life. We're talking about untying the knots of ignorance, the knots that are deep within, so that the life force can flow more vigorously through all the vessels of our bodies and subtle bodies. So this is a wonderful time to practice any breathing practice that you have, any pranayama that you've learned, any breathing workshops you've ever done. This is the time to go back to those practices. And if you don't have that kind of practice, this is a great time in the fall in general, but in particular for this fall, because of this yang energy. If you engage with the breath, you will engage with, in a way, he's saying breathing is the most tangible, experiential thing that we do that speaks to the infinite, that connects us to the infinite. Right? The breath that is immaterial in the air, that comes in through your being and yet has the capacity to regulate your nervous system, but also to regulate and clear the pipes of your spiritual organism. And he's saying that's the key. So in Kriya Yoga in particular and other practices, the breath will have the capacity to bring you in touch with the nutrients from that tank of universal energy, tapping us into that life force, and also bringing the nutrients and the support from that life force, but also expelling in the exhale, if done in particular ways, right? Expelling densities, not only physically, but also at soul level, the capacity to clear out trauma, but the capacity also to clear out karma. So he's saying the breath is very much connects you to a massively productive and capacious engine that taps you into a level of energy you can't even fathom, and a power of cleansing, which then connects to your colon, of cleansing spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically, to expel as well, not just through the exhale, but through the king and queen of the yang organs, right, in the body, the hollow organs, the colon. Right, just a reminder that, right, one of the big engines that deals with toxicity is liver, right? So, and the liver is the spring, by the way, which is very interesting in terms of its connection right now to the fall, to the colon, because the liver, any toxins that are clearing out of your liver, you can't pee them out, you have to poo them out, right? The liver will dump in your duodenum via the bile duct, but it will dump in your duodenum, your small intestine, the colon, and eventually it will land in the toilet. And when you think the spring, right, the rebirth and the expression of self is the liver, can you imagine if you start setting yourself up right now to clear out your pipes, you're also laying in the ground, right, for your liver to be good and ready in the spring for rebirth. So there's a huge component in the fall of embracing, you know, you've heard, I'm sure, through your naturopaths at different times and via different people, that fall cleanses are a good idea. Right, many fall diets in the part of the world that you're in will also focus on reducing inflammation and acidity in your system, for instance, and alkalinizing your system, because so many of the beautiful vegetables that are the late fall vegetables, right, the fall vegetables, are part of, are very powerful in terms of alkalinizing your body. And he's saying, in a sense, right now, it behooves you to lean into the magic of this contraction. To conclude, he's saying that we're talking about trust and trusting your engine and all the layers and levels of your engine. All I'm hearing right now is he's saying, breathe, breathe. that, you know, just breathe. Please. It'll be so much better. Yeah. So with unconditional love for you all, he's saying thank you, namaste. Yeah, and so am I. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be connected to Sri Yukteswar and for him to use me as a phone line. It's a blessing, and it's a blessing, of course, that you're there, because without you, I cannot channel. If there are no ears there other than mine, it's called meditation. It's not channeling. So thank you for being at the other end of the phone and for, in fact, creating the phone line in the first place.